thank you for coming on, first of all.
Oh, not at all. No, it's a pleasure.
It really means a lot that you can have you on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, man.
No worries. So we're here to discuss, the tiny, insignificant question of what is consciousness.
Exactly. Totally irrelevant, I would say, yeah.
Yeah. So the aim is obviously to solve it completely.
Yeah, I'd say 5-10 minutes. We should have it sorted.
Yeah, it should be sorted. So first of all, I guess we should start by listing, what sort of attributes are there of consciousness? What sort of things do people think consciousness is about? So I'll fire that one to you.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago, and he brought up this. He thinks it's a common misconception, and I kind of believe him. Where I was using the word sentient most of the time, when I didn't realise that actually relates more to your senses. So perceiving your senses than it is actually being conscious of being a thing, right?
Really?
So I think I'm still not totally clear on this, but it's a good fact to roll out every now and then. I'm waiting for the right situation at a party, but weirdly it hasn't come up yet, strangely,
No,
especially in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah, weird. Yeah. And but yeah, no, he was insisting sapient was the right way to go, but it definitely got me thinking that we must all have different ideas, I guess, about what we actually mean by being conscious.
But I suppose we are Homo sapiens, not Homo sentiens.
Yeah, right. Hey, that's good. That's cool. Yeah. I'm also talking about I'm a human being, not a human doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say the most, like the monad, if you like that, the most basic elementary unit would just be awareness of self, and everything else on top of that as a corollary, like intelligence or proprioception, like feeling you're in a physical body. I would say they're all just things stacked on top of actually feeling like a self-reflecting thing. But yeah, how about you, man?
Well, interestingly, that last point you just mentioned, I was talking to my lecturer back when we had university before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And he's been doing a lot of work on this emerging field in philosophy called ipsity. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, but I like the sound of it. What's that?
It relates to what you were talking about. It is this very, very fundamental experience of being embodied. Like, that is, even people who are supposedly, have dementia or things like that, where they haven't got the higher level states of awareness.
Yeah.
They still have this very fundamental feeling of being in a body, being a thing in space.
Whoa, okay. So it seems super fundamental then to being conscious in the first place. Okay, yeah. Wow, ipsity. Is that the field or the name of like proprioception, or what does ipsity mean actually?
I think that is the name for the feeling of being embodied.
Sounds like a great cat name as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh wow. All right. Well, it makes me. They forced us to read this book at uni. It's Merleau-Ponty. Do you remember this? It was a book. I can't remember what it was called. It will come to me in a second. But it was about how you probably can't have consciousness without actually being embodied. That you wouldn't be able to have. I guess if you start from like an empirical basis, if you don't have any senses coming in, then you can't possibly form new thoughts, I suppose, and become conscious. But he seemed quite obsessed about this. But I'm sure that would unfold into ipsity as well, being grounded in a body.
That's a really interesting idea, because I suppose like the massive amount of sense data we have coming in does lend massively to the thoughts we have. I wonder if we could actually have any thoughts without having senses. You do need a body to have senses.
Sure. Could you be a disembodied god or something in a void universe and actually have sorry, just while I'm thinking of it, there was I guess it's more like phenomenology, but I was reading something the other day. It was an audiobook, I forget what it was, and there have been a load of experiments, or enough to confirm it, that if your eyes are intact, if the apparatus is intact, but there's a problem with the brain actually interpreting the information, I guess if whichever part of the brain deals with it gets damaged, there are a load of people who have been put in front of lamps who are blind, completely blind functionally, they can't see anything, but they have this ethereal, weird ESP sense for when a light is turned on or not. So even though they can't consciously perceive it, something on the inside knows that light is actually coming in.
Well, there are similar experiments done I think it's patients. I can't remember. I think it's the corpus callosum, like the part that joins the two hemispheres of your brain together.
Sure.
That gets severed, and you show these patients like a picture of a house on a piece of paper, and you ask them to draw what they see, and they'll respond to you that say, "I can't see anything," and yet they will have drawn a house.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, completely unaware of them actually doing it. They will have done it.
Sure. And doesn't the body get split in a way as well? Like the left hand will be doing stuff that the right hand doesn't know about. Will start being violent
like
with
alien hand syndrome.
Is that the name? That's pretty cool. I like that. Okay, alien hand syndrome. Damn, that's
must be terrifying.
But I guess if we want to be fancy about it, I suppose that does lead to this massive question of, well, okay, if you and I are the product of two joined hemispheres, hopefully working in synchrony, and if you separate these and they behave functionally like two different people with two different wills, you know, two different sets of volition or whatever, then is that what we are all the time, and it's just suppressed, or what? I mean, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, about whether, you know, one conscious correlates onto the brain exactly, or whether we can divide consciousness.
That's it. Hey, that's you put that a million times better than like it. That's exactly it. Yeah, could you divide consciousness? Yeah, definitely. Because
that was the basis of one of Descartes' arguments for dualism, I believe. Was the divisibility argument. So you can divide a body, but you can't divide the mind. Therefore, mind is separate from the body. But maybe these experiments where the corpus callosum has been severed and you're essentially become two different people, maybe that disproves Descartes' argument.
Yeah, maybe. And I guess, from the inside, it feels like there's just this one coherent thing. There's just one me. I won't go on the Buddhist rant just yet. I can see it's a bit further down on what we're going to talk about.
It's coming.
Okay, yeah, sure. It's just bursting out of me. But I mean, I don't know, if you think about it, when you're if you're in altered states after a few beers or something, I don't know if one is experimenting with drugs or something. I obviously never would, but if one has, I think you can feel different facets of your mind going on at one time. It's just, so there's this transhuman version of stop me if you know this one, but you know the ship of Theseus, this whole so there's kind of the transhuman version of that, where if you had a mechanical hypothalamus or something, or something smaller, whatever, you replace someone's brain with a mechanical part that's completely that works just as well functionally, and you keep doing that. You can see where this is going already. How much of the brain do you replace until the person becomes mechanical? I mean, that presumably you'd still have the same sense of consciousness. You still feel like you might be a bit smarter or something, but
that's a really interesting point, actually.
Well, I don't know. I remember reading about it at uni. It didn't really go anywhere, and then transhumanism seems to have disappeared for a bit now for some reason. I don't know. But,
Well, hopefully it gets revived, because that's a really interesting question. That's sort of along the lines of like the ship of Theseus idea. Have you ever heard of the China brain argument?
Oh, is this like is the population of China like conscious? Is this
something like that? Yeah. So
if they're working in unity.
So it's like the number of neurons in a brain is roughly equivalent to the population of China.
Sure.
So if everyone in China had a two-way radio, like you know, neurons and synapses work in the brain, would that be functionally the same as a mind?
Yeah. Well, I guess it would be. It gets into the bigger question of is it just neuronal activity? Is it just material? You know, is it just a materialist phenomenon? I guess it would be the actual speed of communication would be the limiting part there to begin with. Like how fast all the individual people in China could communicate to make something coherent in the first place, I guess. Okay, I like that one. Yeah, it also reminds me of the again, I know this is a bit later on what we're going to talk about, but the Chinese room, Searle's Chinese room argument. And I often wonder where the difference is between computers and us. If the computer had the same potential, I don't know, if it was a neural net that modeled my brain to some degree, or someone's brain, whatever. If it did have understanding, if it could demonstrate understanding, then what's actually changed then? Is it just the amount of parts of a system that can talk to each other, like the population of China, or is it something? Is there like a ghost in the machine? I guess
Well, this is the.
That is literally actually that's the main question, I suppose.
Yeah. Well,
We solved this in 5 minutes, and I think it's been at least 7. This is ridiculous.
well, we better just give up.
Yeah. But yeah, sorry, go on.
But yeah, so we've sort of come to the conclusion that at least being embodied is some part of what consciousness is. So let's talk about knowledge. I mean, people would say knowledge, intelligence, knowledge of the external world, and self-knowledge. Would you say is part of being conscious?
Again, I'll try to reserve myself from going on the Buddhist rant, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but with infants, with babies being conscious, I mean, we can't really ask them about their internal sensations. But I mean, so I guess that'd be the perfect opening. Yeah. Do you think babies are conscious to some degree yet, when they're, say, in the first few months of them being around?
Yeah, I suppose then it becomes a question of less of a dichotomy, are they conscious or not, but more of a gradient. Like, are they less conscious?
Yeah.
Are they are they not conscious? Are they less conscious than us?
Sure. Yeah, well, the reason I asked was because they don't really have any knowledge except, I mean, they definitely don't have language, unless they're extremely clever. They don't have language yet, which everyone seems to, for some reason, associate with consciousness, which I don't understand at all. Or they seem to associate it with thought, which I don't get. So they don't have language. They have basically no understanding of any of the mechanisms around them. They've got just the basic built-in kind of responses to their mum and dad, I guess, or their mum in particular. And yeah, I don't know. So if they're not conscious, it's hard to imagine at what point does it mysteriously creep in when they become a toddler or something, you know?
But this is where I start to disagree, because you're sort of describing, correct me if I'm wrong, the blank slate model.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, so we sort of come in, our minds are blank, we have no a priori ideas, and we sort of gather the knowledge from the world, from experiencing and sense data and all that sort of stuff. But I've been watching some lectures recently, and I used to be quite, for John Locke. I used to be a proper John Locke fanboy.
Yeah.
But it is true that without a sort of a priori structure of understanding, a la Kant, we wouldn't be able to experience because I saw a statistic once, and it was like we take in like trillions and trillions of bits of sense data every second, and our brain has to filter through it all to figure out what's relevant. How's it supposed to do that without an a priori sort of structure for experiencing,
Sure, I couldn't agree more, yeah. Well, I think a really, I guess an example from outside philosophy would be, I've always thought universal grammar was the best example of that. And I don't know why it's so contentious still, but just like almost every infant on planet Earth, as they get older, has this natural capacity to start organizing sounds into language, and they pick up on grammar without anyone explaining usually grammatical rules to them. So there's clearly some, even with language, there's some a priori structure on the inside there already, if you like.
Yeah.
So I don't know, so for sure it's going to extend to they're going to apprehend reality with some kind of a priori structure as well. So yeah, no, I completely agree with you there, for sure.
Incidentally, I know someone who, because babies, I think it's been found that the part of the brain that comprehends language is sort of switched on. It's on hyperdrive when you're an infant, so you can pick up the language of your parents.
Okay.
And I know someone who's that part of their brain never really switched off, and so they can pick up a language in a week and they're fluent.
Wow.
How insane is that?
Damn. So I don't want to pick at it, but so did they get into an MRI machine, or they just have this amazing aptitude for language? That's how they know about it.
I don't think they were ever officially diagnosed or anything, but such an amazing aptitude for it, like you said.
Wow. That's crazy. That is crazy. Well, yeah, and I they must be extremely fun to hang out with. I tried throwing like Icelandic at them and see what they make of it. That'd be the ultimate test, I guess.
Yeah.
There were, I think, with a few feral kids. I don't know if that's the correct term. That's what I remember reading as years ago. Feral children had grown up either in just basements or horrendous conditions where they weren't brought up properly by loving parents, and they hadn't actually been around. People hadn't been speaking to them, so they hadn't had time to pick up language. I think by the time you get to about 12, you can pick up, if you haven't acquired a language by then, I think you can still pick up nouns with not too much trouble. but you'll never properly understand syntax. I don't think you'll ever become a fluent speaker of any language. So it does seem to be time dependent. Like it does go away after around 10 or 11, I think, with most people anyway, which is pretty weird.
That's really interesting because I was reading a book and it talked about how humans, you see the objects around you and you don't see, a table. You see a tool first and then you kind of consciously think, that's a table.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting that you said feral children, if that is the PC term.
I can't find a better. Yeah, sorry.
If they can recognize, nouns, things, that lends a lot of credit to the idea that humans perceive things as tools first before they perceive them as objects.
Hey, I hadn't thought about that. That's a great point. Yeah, definitely.
That's really interesting.
Well, I bet that's another a priori structure underlying us. I bet that's what makes us so good at tool building, is that we just inherently want to not commodify, but turn everything into an object that you can use or exploit or understand or something. That's probably part of our... Well, sorry, this is a massive segue, but just while I think about it, I found this VR, like virtual reality app, if you like, program, whatever, where you could play around with objects in 4-dimensional space. I don't know if you've played around with this yourself.
No, I don't.
But it was obviously very trippy, and I can recommend it with certain recreational pharmaceuticals. And I spent a lot of time trying to bend my head around. I really wanted to become intuitive with, because obviously objects don't behave at all how they would in 3D space. They just sort of disappear randomly. But you can see there is a pattern to it, but you can't quite apprehend it with your 3D brain. And it got me wondering, if you were really a sadist and you brought up kids, forcing them they can only perceive the world through a 4D app, would they pick it up intuitively? Like I wondered if maybe we've, like, I guess I'm saying, like, what's the limit of what humans a priori can kind of apprehend as they're growing up, if that makes sense. Like, is it just 3D space, or if you actually sort of train them on this early on, if they would be able to kind of stretch their consciousness that way, if that makes sense?
Yeah, when you say 4D space, can you just explain what you mean? Yeah,
so...
maybe you can't. I don't.
Yeah. That's that exact. I definitely can't. But it's like this kind of fun. It's more a mathematical model or a mathematical trick than anything I think we can grasp intuitively. But just if you the way it's always explained, it's so cliche, but I'm going to do it. Like if you had a 2D shape, trying to imagine a 3D shape, it'd basically be impossible to. It's quite difficult not to do this visually. But like, okay, the best example I've heard is if an ant was walking around a branch, the circumference of a branch or whatever, it would end up where it had started because it doesn't understand 3D space. And 4D space to us is kind of the same equivalent. So an extra dimension of freedom, an extra axis of movement that we can't comprehend. So things would appear things would seem to appear and disappear to us, just visually in front of us. The same way as if you were poking a 2D shape, your finger would just sort of appear as this single 2D balloon passing through its membrane, if you like space-time membrane, space-time membrane, appearing through its dimension, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
so basically the ending of
segue,
basically the ending of Interstellar. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Damn it! I should have just said that. That'd be way better. Yeah. Sure. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, that was a massive tangent, but
no, interesting tangent.
Well, it gets a bit to, I know it's animal consciousness you've got down here, and this is something I think about loads, and how much they, but I wasn't sure if you had a point you wanted to
No, carry on.
Well, we don't have a good, it's something quite close to my heart, where it has been in recent years, like whether they are sapient or sentient in any way, or like I think Descartes thought they were robots, right? Basically, that they
automatons, I think was his word.
That was it. Yeah. That's nice and clinical. It kind of I like that. Okay, automatons. Yeah, sure. But I feel like this is becoming more and more of a problem we can't overlook so much now. But yeah. Well, yeah. Where do you reckon they? Like, I don't know. Say higher mammals, say bonobos or something like that. Where do you reckon they rate? If we can say they're conscious or whatever.
I think I'll preface this by saying that human beings, in my opinion, are leagues above even the highest order animals. I don't think that means to say that they're not conscious at all. I think they're far from it. Me personally, I would go along the lines of using Thomas Nagel's definition, like they're conscious if it's something that it's like to be them.
Sure.
And I think that definitely higher order animals, such as bonobos, like they've got a very strong sense of self-identity. They know they're a thing in the world. Maybe they even have that sense of ipsity, you know, that they're a thing in the world and they know that. And, you know, other intelligent animals like dolphins and crows, things like that can recognize themselves. And they've got all these hallmarks,
that's
you know?
a weird one, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and magpies, weirdly, what's that all about? Like, what? Why?
Yeah, magpies, yeah.
Why? Yeah. Well, it's a funny one. I've been kind of following the argument for ever since I guess I graduated. I've been following it with a bit of interest, and a lot of it seems to come from, as you just said, and as I kind of said automatically as well, like what animals can do. Like, can they, like performatively, can they, if you put an elephant in front of the mirror with a top hat, you know, does it take the top hat off, or some kind of other totally demeaning, insane experiment? And yeah, but I've always, or recently anyway, I'm coming around to like, it's more phenomenologically from the inside. Do they, rather than what they can do to demonstrate intelligence, it's more like, can they, you know, like if my cat annoys me, I don't beat her or whatever, or, you know, the reason I wouldn't hit her or something isn't because I find it distasteful. It's because I reckon there's a really small version of me, or a smaller version of me on the inside of her head, you know?
Yeah.
Even though she can't, she's terrible at arithmetic, she sucks at cooking, but I still, like, she still seems to get, she still demonstrates fear. I can see she's clearly trying to problem solve to get up onto the ledge by the window or whatever, you know, this kind of stuff. So it seems like a smaller version of human consciousness, and I know I feel like a thing, so it's difficult not to impute it, not to kind of see it in her, you know?
Well, that's the traditional way people solve the problem of other minds, you know, because it is, it's a,
but it is exactly, yeah,
like it's a private thing to be a mind. I don't know,
Sure.
even from talking to you, that you have a mind. You know, I can't
Sure.
I can't peer into your skull and see
Sure.
what's there. So all we really can do is look at animals and see how our behavior maps onto them, and
Sure.
use kind of the humans as a yardstick.
That's it. And also all the apparatus looks almost identical. I mean, okay, the in almost every case. Well, I found a weird thing out the other day about, I don't know if you knew this, about it seems to be relative brain size seems to be the important part with intelligence when it comes to animals. So
Right.
whales have, I think, is it whales? I think they have gigantic brains, but they're not, you know, they're smart, but then they're not us. Whereas our brains relative to our bodies are enormous in the animal kingdom, I think, and that seems to be the important part. But yeah, where I was going with this was just, the fact that animals seem to have such similar setups to us, but their central nervous systems, I mean mammals anyway, their central nervous systems and you know, and their brains. It just seems odd if we're going to grant sapience, should we say, to humans, that they don't at least have a little bit of that they feel like a bit of a thing maybe.
Yeah, but I think this is one of the problems with Descartes, was that, you know, if you assume that animals are just automatons, they don't have consciousness, then that justifies, you know, animal abuse and things like that. I mean, he was prolific for, you know, dissecting animals, and I remember reading the Meditation for the first time, and he said, you know, have your dissected dog's heart there in front of you, you know, so you can do it along as you read it.
Oh my god!
And I was like,
wow.
Oh, excellent, thanks Renee, thanks for that.
I don't remember that. Oh boy! Oh wow! Okay.
But yeah, there's certainly similarities, but I mean, you see the same similarities to an extent in plants as well.
I thought you were going to say this. Yeah, definitely, yeah. That's why I'm quite careful not to go on the vegetarian rant in public or whatever, because that will often be brought up, and I don't have a good. They do seem to want to protect themselves. They do communicate with each other in large networks, like these is it aspirin trees in Colorado, willow trees, whatever. That I think that's like the largest organism on the planet, and they're clearly communicating with each other, telling each other, like swapping fluid, swapping water if some of them are low, whatever. So yeah, absolutely. If you go down this road, you don't really stop until you get to atoms, basically, do you? I guess, you know.
No, and then obviously at the atomic level, everyone's the same anyway.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah, well, we hope so. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you want to go there yet, but it seems like that leads naturally onto the AI question. Because
definitely, yeah.
If we don't really have what was this test from Blade Runner, the one where they would show them a picture of the
Voight-Kampff test.
Oh, Matt, that was wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to pick your brains about sci-fi lore more. This is clearly okay. Right, yeah, but we don't really have a litmus test even for other humans being conscious. So I always wonder when AI gets good enough to start having convincing conversations with us and at least mimicking emotion, I mean, it would just be too late. Like, how the hell are we supposed to tell whether there's actual activity on the inside there, you know?
I think that's a really interesting question, because one of the main points about AI is that we seem to always envision AI, you know, in science fiction and in real life as taking an anthropomorphic form. You know, they've got to look like people, otherwise we don't want to grant it consciousness.
Yeah.
This was my. I wrote an essay on this actually in university. Have you ever seen the film Her with Joaquin Phoenix?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's a great movie.
So that was one of the big questions of that film. You know, Samantha appeared fully conscious.
Sure.
She could answer questions. She even breathed. You know, but she was just a phone.
Sure.
So we have a reluctance to grant things consciousness when they don't look like people. You know.
Yeah.
Or animals, say.
I reckon the reason why I have this theory, the reason why we don't do that too much in sci-fi is because it becomes totally impersonable. Like, we can't, like, what was it? There's a really bad Johnny Depp, I thought it was bad, Johnny Depp movie years ago, Transcendence, I think it was called. Don't know if you saw this, but he, as a spoiler a bit, he becomes a kind of, the main character anyway, becomes this kind of super intelligent AI god at the end. And it was completely unrelatable in every way. I mean, it was just, you know, you can't, I didn't think it worked as like a narrative device, same as the Lawnmower Man, because you're like, well, where is he? What is he then? You know, and I guess it's almost impossible for us to wrap our minds around what that would look like. But yeah, you're quite right. We always imagine them as being human and pleasant, and often as an American woman for some reason, having an American woman's voice for sure. But hey, I mean, Samantha, the girl in Her, she was, I think she was completely disembodied, right? She didn't have a.
No, exactly.
Except for that weird scene with the human stand-in that came over to their house or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a strange one for sure.
It's definitely, I think, a pressing question, because obviously, if we do decide to grant AI consciousness, that plays a lot into our ethics. You know,
sure. Do we grant them rights on the back of that? Yeah.
Do we grant rights to, you know, a self-driving car? You know, a quantum computer?
Sure. Well, yeah, this was why I was probably being a bit overly vociferous with the same kind of animal question about them being conscious. It's something I can't really stop thinking about recently, is because it doesn't. I know it isn't officially bound in any constitution, pretty much that I know of, that the reason why we don't kill people is because you know the other person is conscious. We do it we keep these things going for the preservation of society, and fair enough, okay. I think quite a lot of it's based on British common law, and that's where it comes from. But ultimately, the reason why you don't, you know, you're not supposed to hit people in the face if they annoy you or whatever, is because you know there's another version of you on the other side that is going to suffer as a result of that. So I feel like it's kind of the same problem with animals and machines, that if there's no internal suffering, if there's no internal activity there, it's pretty much carte blanche, like same as Grand Theft Auto or something. I don't think I'm really killing people, you know. It's just pixels. It doesn't matter. But that's when AI starts behaving with some semblance of, well, like you said, not even like a human, but in a very clever way. I don't know, demonstrating emotion, Actually, what would it be? What would it need to? How would it need to behave that we would start actually talking about this, even if it wasn't? I think
what the general metric is nowadays is that they call it AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is at least as good as a person.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a good question. Like, what would it need to show?
Well, so with your China example earlier, I mean, I forget where I saw this, but this idea that, you know, Google, how long does it take before Google's kind of sentient? You know, it's just contained. If it's just information theory, if it's just a combination of information in some magical sense, then I don't know, is Google some low-level intelligent? And then also if AGI is like, I don't know, building antimatter drives and taking us off to the galaxy or something, even then that could, sorry, a brief segue, but it reminds me of a thing Noam Chomsky said when someone asked him, I might be screwing this up, I'm sorry, but it's close enough, I think, when Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov for the first computer to ever beat a human at chess. And I think someone asked Noam Chomsky what he thought, you know, works at MIT, you know, is quite into computation and linguistics and whatnot. And he said, well, yeah, it's as impressive as if you'd be impressed by a bulldozer beating a weightlifter or whatever, you know, like it's the same kind of, it's like a human weightlifter. It's not really, it's just it's a function of strength rather than intelligence, if you like.
Yeah.
So back to the Chinese room. So I just mean, even then you could imagine a highly like cosmically intelligent computer if you want, but it would still be hard to say if that actually, if it has its own interests at any point, if it has its own internal life or anything.
Well, it gets to a point where, especially if we do ever invent, I think it's called self-recursive AI, where it can, it gets to a point where it's so intelligent that it can design a better version of itself infinitely. Where, I mean, we're not going to stand a chance, that AI could possibly experience emotions that we could never dream of.
Well, or I think in a way the scary side of that might be that it could keep exponentially improving, whatever, and maybe it has nasty intentions towards humanity, or just sees us as pointless, whatever, go full Terminator.
Yeah.
But you could still imagine it never actually developed consciousness at some point, because it doesn't arise naturally. So you could have an entire aliens arrive in 1,000 years, and there's this glittering metropolis all run by this super advanced AI, but the lights aren't on the inside. There's no mental activity on the inside. I feel like that would be the scarier option. Like the consciousness doesn't naturally emerge.
And I mean, if you had such an intelligent AI to the extent that it could rearrange any matter into building more of itself,
Sure.
and there was an example in a book I was reading, Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark.
Oh, I vaguely remember this.
Yeah, it was a cosmic virus. So this AI could send a message to other planets, and they'd receive it, and they'd get it to build another AI, and it would just send on another virus, and then the whole universe, could be rearranged into this AI, and it would be completely dark. There would be nothing alive on the inside.
Sure.
And then there's nothing left,
Yeah.
Like I think Max Tegmark, one of his goals was, when writing that book, was that we've got to be careful with AI, definitely. We've got to plan for the future that we want, but we've got to want to wake up as much of the universe as possible. And I thought that was a really lovely way of putting it.
Yeah, it definitely, yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's part of the. I'm sure he wasn't taking it out of the transhumanist kind of law, but there's definitely been this thing around for at least 15 years since was it The Singularity is Near, this Ray Kurzweil book? Maybe it's 10 years old or something.
Yeah.
Where I think he thought the end result would be that we kind of do the same version of this. We infuse everything with nanobots, and we wake the entire universe up or whatever, which is, it sounds great, but I do wonder if it's like a bit of a human-centric, more of us, more stuff that's that's like consciousness would be the be-all and end-all,
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, whether we should, if we can, whether we should wake up the universe,
or whether it's awake already, of course. But
or whether it's awake already, But I suppose that brings us nicely on to if we want to talk about consciousness, and if we want to talk about waking up the universe, if it's something we can do, where consciousness actually lies.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, the common definition that everyone accepts today is that consciousness is found in the brain. If you ask someone, where's your mind, they're going to point vaguely at their head in some sort of way. But I was reading, actually, an interesting fact, I don't know if you've heard this, about the cerebellum in the brain. So it's this really, really archaic and old part of the brain, and it has roughly half the neurons in our brain and twice as many synapses. And yet, if it's severely damaged, or in some cases people can be born without it, and they continue to live completely normal lives, even though this structure with half of their neurons is just,
Whoa.
out of the question.
What?
So it does provide, a problem for the people that say, well, consciousness maps onto these parts of the brain.
Sure. So do you know if they are they impaired if they get it? Are they impaired to some?
No, from what I've read, they're capable of living completely full lives. Wow. They experience the full gamut of emotions. They've not got any problems with their experience. And yet, this massive chunk, half of their brain, is missing.
Whoa, I did not know about that. That is really weird, because that's the argument I always use as a staunch materialist when anyone brings up this kind of, well, the brain is you said it earlier, but the brain is a receiver or something, for some higher form. And I always try to bring up, well, hang on, but we know that if someone is injured, if they have a brain injury, it usually in a particular part will correspond to a particular injury. But I think if what you've just said is true, that completely blows that out of the water. Then I didn't know that at all. That's really interesting. Wow. Okay.
So you consider yourself as a materialist?
A reluctant one. I would love to be shown any proof otherwise, and I would immediately change camps to whatever. I would love to believe we're not just meat. Yeah, but I feel like if there's one thing we should be conservative about, it's scientific materialism essentially, and not allow anything into the pantheon of science until we have uncontestable proof as yet. But yeah, how about yourself?
Well, I've had a difficult relationship with the mind, to say the least. Okay. I'm sort of on the property dualist camp myself. Okay. So I believe that while the brain, the mind, is non-physical, it depends on the brain for its existence. Sure. But it's interesting you should bring this up, because I was having a conversation with someone on my server the other day, another staunch materialist, and they pointed to science to say there's nothing in science that says that we have a non-physical mind.
Sure.
And I was researching some articles, and I found a really interesting one that says that we can have the scientific worldview, but not be so reductionist about it.
Yeah.
So, it's a pretty common argument, but obviously, if the mind does turn out to be non-physical, then no amount of sciencing is going to find it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess that assumes that whatever it is based on, not material then, but whatever the stand-in for that is, if it's some, I don't know, if it's living in some extra dimension of space or whatever it is, presumably you can't imagine it. You would still imagine, though, you could apply science to it. Maybe it would be in the same way as, I'm not making this as a mean example. I just mean it's the first thing that comes into my head. But like in the same way as in fantasy, I was going to say Harry Potter, but I'll say just in fantasy, you have magic is sometimes treated as a science, and I've always thought that was really cool because it's usually something we think of as chaotic and obeying no rules. But recently, especially maybe from Harry Potter and serious fantasy and stuff, it's been treated as another system of rules, if you like. And I always imagined if like property dualism, or if the mind turned out to be non-physical, if you like, that it would be the same situation, that it would be a new science that isn't based on matter, but some exotic matter or something like that.
Yeah.
But do you mean you wouldn't be able to apply scientific principles to it if it was extra material or whatever?
Yeah. So science as we have it at the minute obviously requires empirical evidence and falsification. So if it does turn out that the mind is something that is, extra physical or can't be falsified, then it's not something that science as we know it could discover. But like you said, if there is...
I only remember this from undergrad. Sorry, let's cut in, but I only remember this from undergrad. I can't remember you'll know the official name for this. But it was one of the objections to Descartes' dualism, that how a non-physical entity or non-physical matter or whatever could interact with our matter. It's hard to. There must be some bridge there, presumably somewhere. I feel like.
Yeah, the interaction problem.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, that's cool. the technical name for it. Thank you. So, Descartes' response to that was that the brain interacts with the mind in the pineal gland, which doesn't really help anyone because the pineal gland is a physical thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't explain anything. But that was the gland that was traditionally thought of as the kind of third eye, the kind of, that sort of idea.
Sure.
So you can see where he gets it from. But it was, I think it was Elizabeth of Bohemia. It was her objection. She said, well, if something's physical, it's got a surface. And non-physical things can't, by definition, have a surface. So how is something without a surface meant to interact with something with a surface?
Sure.
And it's a valid point.
Yeah, I feel like it is for sure, as long as you work, strictly in definitions and with theoretics. I feel like it's almost as though you were if the gods could be here now and actually explain to us how it worked, if it was non-physical. I feel like it would be the same question as if we were trying to explain X-rays to someone in the 1500s or something. They would have the same kind of questions that maybe we do about this now. But yeah, so what? Without me being too invasive, what makes you think it might be non-physical as such?
Well, I don't know if you've gathered from videos I posted in the past, but I'm quite a defender of qualia.
Yeah,
but I did try, just to describe what qualia are. They're the kind of, the most fundamental units of experience that we have. And I did try in one video, just to link it back to what you said actually about, a new science of magic, shall we say, that plays by different rules, but are nonetheless discoverable.
Sure.
I was doing a lot of research for one video I did about the explanatory gap. And we don't have any idea at the moment, what causes our sensations, whether qualia are non-physical, whether the mind's non-physical. But in time, we will hopefully have progressed in our science to be able to give it a physical answer. That's the goal. And the reason I'm a dualist, for lack of a better word, is that we're not there yet. And qualia is a good description of the phenomenology behind it, shall we say.
Definitely, yeah.
I don't believe we're at the point with science to provide a fully physical account of mind, but I suppose I'm sort of the opposite to you in that sense, because you're ready to jump across to dualism. I'm ready to jump across to physicalism as soon as the evidence is there.
That's why I said I'm a reluctant hard materialist, if you like, because I feel like you were about to mention the hard problem of consciousness, so I didn't want to butt in, but that's one thing that was kind of my Damascus Road moment, where I haven't managed, I still can't imagine how you could match up internal sense experiences, the taste of chocolate or whatever, with meat. I can't see any bridge between this. This feels like so far off that it just, if you could, I think I pretty much take any theory over materialism right now, which is probably why I've gone down the panpsychist avenue, I suppose. But yeah. I
mean, that's the thing about it. By definition, it is a really hard question, and it's like there's this massive crevice between two sides, where it's like you said. You look at someone's brain and you see a certain amount of neurons firing, and you say, "Oh, that's the taste of chocolate," and it's like, is it really? No. It's a really hard thing to imagine.
Sure, and it's also the world of being a thing, being a me is totally. It could not be more different to seeing if I was to see my brain in real time on an MRI scanner or something. There's just no association there whatsoever, even on some abstract level. It really confuses me why. I don't know if you're following the kind of the hard problem as it is today with Dan Dennett. And how I still don't get how he tries to explain it away. I've really tried to grapple with how he doesn't think it's a real problem, and I still don't really understand why.
No, I haven't been keeping up with it enough to realise.
Oh, fair enough.
It was mentioned in that book, Life 3.0, and it was in relation particularly, this blew my mind when I read it. So Max Tegmark, he was talking about AI consciousness, and in particular free will. So we had discussion of determinism, and how atoms abide by the laws of physics. Everything is made of atoms, so everything seems, at least at a surface level, to be deterministic. Sure. We won't go into quantum theory. Just leave that for now. But he said, and this was the thing that really blew my mind, the quickest way to see whether a computer program is going to work or not is to run it. You can run however many tests you want, in theory, or this might happen, and map it out. But the quickest way to see if it's going to work or not is just to run it.
Sure.
And he said, well, if that's what free will is, the quickest way to see if we're going to do something is to do it, then where's the problem there? That is as close as free will as we're going to get even in a deterministic worldview.
Yeah, I've never heard that argument before. I really like that. Yeah, it gets rid of any, if you imagine some Cartesian evil demon above you who knew the position of every atom. What's the name for this? The demon the demon that knew every position of every atom in the universe, or the velocities and trajectories or whatever, so could predict everything that was going to happen. But that, I guess Tegmark's example, get around that because it still couldn't compute fast enough compared to actually just living it.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you could theoretically predict the motion and velocity of every atom, you'd never arrive at the point to realize what's going to happen until it actually happened.
Yeah.
And
that's really, how is this not more famous? That's really uplifting. I've never come across that before. That's great.
So that really blew my mind, because even in the strictest deterministic framework, you still have room for free will.
Yeah. Damn, I really like that. That's wow. You've just wiped away 10 years of existential misery. That's
brilliant.
I really like that. That's great.
And that plays into our ethics, our responsibility, all of those things we can still have, even if we go full Matrix Reloaded and everything's deterministic. We can still have all those things, and I thought that was really wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it reminded me slightly of with private keys, like with encryption online, and how it's usually just a huge prime number, like I don't know, a 20-digit prime number or something gigantic, and that's the security code, and you've got to work out what the two what's been multiplied together essentially to make this prime number. And the reason why it's so effective is because I think these are numbers that are so large it would take longer than the lifetime of the universe to solve if you were trying to brute force it. So you have to have the private key. And I always thought that was weird that our phones are running on that principle, that even with billions of years you couldn't crack it with just brute forcing the thing,
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a great example, man. I like that. That's awesome. That is awesome.
So we've had a bit of discussion of materialism and dualism. I'm going to turn to you for this one, because I assume you've researched it more than I have. But panpsychism seems like a third way.
Yeah, well, I'm only going to be proselytizing from the arguments that were given to me, and like I said, I got really into it because it seemed like such a novel way out of the forest. So I'm not behind it because of its efficacy in explaining anything. I just think it's a really cool idea. But the way it was explained to me anyway was by watching a bunch of talks, reading some papers by David Chalmers, who's quite a strong proponent of this, and the guy who coined the hard problem of consciousness as well, I think. And his argument was that, just like you said, the neural correlates of consciousness, scanning someone in a brain scanner still doesn't match up with. There's still no obvious data to tell you how that produces the taste of anything or the feel of anything, essentially. So we're missing something huge when it comes to actual experience. We still can't explain this in terms of meat. And there's quite a nice corollary there with electromagnetism, which just didn't fit into any models back in the day, essentially, when this was Faraday, Maxwell. I think it was Maxwell originally came up with the original equations for describing electromagnetism. And I really hope it's Maxwell. He postulated electromagnetism as a fundamental force in the universe, which was a really radical idea. So alongside gravity and later the strong and weak nuclear forces, and that worked really well. Now it was a fundamental constituent of the universe rather than something that didn't fit into the model. And so the suggestion is that maybe that's what consciousness is now. That's why we're having such a hard problem with trying to integrate it into my silly conservative materialistic view or whatever, materialist view, because it's not going to fit, because it's a fundamental constituent of the universe. So to wrap this ridiculous rant up, essentially what you get out of that is that necessarily atoms must be a little bit conscious if it's a fundamental force, the same way as atoms have spin and charge, particles have spin and charge, and then molecules must be slightly more conscious, and then up and up until you get to us. But I must say that the hard part about that is imagining, why do you need the brain then? Like, what is the brain collecting these weird blobs of consciousness, like some kind of this kind of grey goo or whatever? What's going on there? But how about you, man?
It's something that I've looked into in the past, and actually when I was at uni, I attended a fantastic talk actually by one of the postgraduate students who was doing his thesis on panpsychism and idealism. So idealism obviously being the view that there's no such thing as matter, everything is mind. And one of the main criticisms of idealism, especially Berkeley's idealism, is that he uses God to kind of fill in the gaps, because if we're not looking at something, then it doesn't exist. The room behind us doesn't exist. But you can solve that if God is watching everything all the time. There's various problems with that. Obviously, there's no evidence that God actually has that role that Berkeley places him in. And you can have the atheistic arguments as well. So this postgraduate student, he said that we can patch up idealism the theory that everything is mind using panpsychism. So there's no need for God in this instance because everything's watching itself all the time.
Whoa. Wow.
And that sort of blew my mind as well.
Wow, that's a great combination of two insane ideas to make something brilliant.
But then I don't know how well that fits in with your description of it as kind of a fundamental constituent of the universe. If consciousness is a thing such as spin on a particle, how that would work if everything was mind, if everything was consciousness.
So I always have a hard... Oh, it also just reminds me of... You probably know this story in more detail than I do, but who was the guy who was really annoyed with Berkeley? Was he a bishop or something? And he was really annoyed with Berkeley's idealism. And apparently he was on a beach in front of a load of people and he just went up and kicked a rock and said, I refute Berkeley thus. Like, everything can't be... Yeah, like, what a power move, Like, what a dick. So I never understood quite what they meant by everything being mind. Like, as in being ethereal or being a product of something conscious, or
the technical term is idea. So there are various arguments for it. There's a lot of philosophy behind it, mainly to do with John Locke and his primary secondary quality distinction. It's a bit complicated to go into here, but his basic argument, his master argument he called it, was he said, try and imagine a tree that no one else is thinking of. And you say, okay, yeah, I can do that, obviously, Berkeley. And then he says, well, you're thinking of it. It has to exist in someone's mind. And so his argument was that all that exists are ideas. And the way he traditionally formulated it was that, God is the kind of source of all these ideas, and our minds each partake a bit in God.
Cool. Okay.
Which is, it's trippy.
It gives everything this really non-physical quality as well. Like, I feel like there's a bit of a relation there to modern physics now, where kind of we don't really believe in solidity anymore. We know it's just like we don't really believe you can't really touch anything. It's just electrons repelling other electrons. So like a whole example of a whole idea of solidity is just a total illusion. And I always wondered, like, so what is behind anything then? And ideas is a great answer to that. That's awesome.
And that was Berkeley's point, because someone said, well, why can't you just be simple? Why can't it all be matter? Sure. And Berkeley said, well, why does it have to be matter? Why not ideas? It's equally absurd either way.
It is.
It's crazy to think what the universe might be made of either way. So why not be ideas at all? Why not?
Sure. I tell you what, I've been watching some old debates between William Lane Craig, the Christian, and Dawkins, and some people from back in the day, and that would get raised a lot by William Lane Craig. And even though I don't agree with him on most things, it is hard to get around that when you actually think of what the current picture of matter is. There's nothing a priori or normal about that. It's totally bizarre. And if you were if you had no access to any scientific equipment whatsoever, you would never come up with that model. There's nothing common sense about it. So why not ideas?
Exactly, because we're all just sort of, we get taught it in school and we get raised up on atomism. We just say, everything's made out of atoms. We just accept it. But when you think for just 2 seconds, it's like, actually, that's mad.
Yeah. So this the guy's talk you're watching, his idea was that the universe is kind of watching itself, and that's how the ideas are being contained and stay consistent. Yeah,
because in Berkeley's original formulation, if you didn't have God, things only existed if you were experiencing them. So the stuff behind you, if you left an apple in a drawer, for instance, it would cease to exist because it's not being observed. But with this guy's talk, if everything in the universe is watching itself and everything else all the time, then everything would be what sustains everything else.
That is very trippy.
It is.
That is very trippy. I wonder, what did Berkeley think consciousness was made of then? Because it can't just be did you think it's just a massively complicated like matrix of ideas producing sentience or something then? Or?
Well, I think yes, and his answer to what would that matrix be would be God.
Okay, fair enough.
So God is kind of the source of all ideas.
That's a cool card to pull. Yeah, okay, that works.
And I would say, because looking at Occam's razor and that, obviously the simplest answer is often the best one. if you put idealism to a dualist, say, and it is a lot more simple.
Yeah.
It's a lot more simple. It's maybe as simple as materialism. So there's no reason to favor one or the other, but there's no reason to deny one over the other either.
Yeah. Well, you could imagine if, I know it's a really cliche example to use, but you can imagine if you woke up as if you were a sentient character in a computer game and you woke up, the material world would seem completely consistent to you as long as the program was working properly or whatever.
Yeah.
And you would have no concept that what you're actually based in is, I mean, that's about as close to not ideas, but I suppose, something immaterial as it gets. I mean, it's just code. And, you would have no idea that the bedrock of your reality was just basically pure idealism. So it's kind of the same situation, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, that's assuming we're not in a simulation anyway.
Yes, indeed. That is true. That is true.
You just go down a rabbit hole, don't you? It gets tricky. But
yeah. I can't believe I came to this conversation sober. What was I thinking?
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked a bit about what consciousness is, which beings we might consider conscious, and where consciousness could be located in the body or in some non-physical realm. So let's take a brief detour, talk about when consciousness is, whether we, exist in the present, or whether there's other factors at play, or, if time is a construct of our consciousness, I suppose. So what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, this was the debate we always used to have at uni with Kant's categories of experience, was it? Whether time is one of them, or whether you could be conscious without time. So whether you could be a deity outside of time and still actually have conscious experience. It's hard to imagine how you could have thoughts without the passage of time and how you could change. But yeah, I don't actually. Do you know where Christian theology or anything stands on that? How they think God could, God seems in the Old and New Testament, he does seem to have changed his mind in a few points. So presumably he does have days when he's feeling a bit more or a bit less angry or whatever. So there must be a change there with gods in theology, I guess.
Well, there's a debate in the Christian standpoint whether God is eternal or everlasting, because it says both in the Bible. One being God is timeless; he exists outside of time. The classic example is, he's on a hill and he's looking at all the traffic. He can see it. He can see everything below.
Sure.
And the other example is that God exists within time, but for the whole of time.
Okay.
And I don't know where you stand on that personally.
Yeah. Well, it's probably only my bias of 11 years of Church of England. I don't want to say brainwashing because everyone was super polite. They're always lovely. But it definitely hammered in this idea that God is outside of time. And I always thought that was the standard, the kind of orthodoxy. But I hadn't heard about that distinction, that he might not be outside of time. He might just be immortal, basically. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah,
those are the two general views. Okay. I mean, I would side with you that God exists outside of time and can kind of see all of it at once. Because I always imagine if God is, let's say, immortal, for lack of a better term, within time, then that sort of means he's subject to change. He changes throughout time. And that doesn't seem to gel with what Christians think God is.
Well, it kind of makes him a very powerful super being, but not the kind of perfect supreme being that I feel like most of us have been raised with anyway. Yeah. And also it makes it really hard to imagine how he would have created the universe from outside time as well, in a way.
Yeah. I mean, these are all these questions where our way of grasping it sort of breaks down.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like your 4D game, but sort of just extrapolated outwards to infinity. It just becomes impossible to imagine.
I've often had this with again, bring it back to my cat. Like I will always continue to do, but I always, sometimes she'll be watching me, I don't know, cook once in a blue moon or doing something particularly human, and she's clearly interested, but I know she can never conceptually wrap her mind around it. And I am often wondering if we're having the same problem. They'll just trying to grapple with, I don't know, an immortal being or something. Well, no, an eternal being, I guess. It's something we're not cognitively capable of actually wrapping our minds around yet,
Yeah. Because, I mean, to return to the question, does time exist without consciousness? I mean, we can talk about God, but we can talk about people as well. I mean, if we imagine a universe in which there are no people, or there are no sentient beings, let's say, or sapient beings, whichever is the correct term, can there be any sense of time passing if there's nothing there to experience it, you know?
It's, when Einstein was poking fun at the quantum theorists, and he said, well, is the moon there if we're not looking at it? Does it carry on staying in the sky? I guess it's the same kind of question with time. Yeah. Well, as you were saying, I was just thinking what would even be a halfway clever answer to that? I got nothing clever, but the fact that before we were here, the universe appears to have undergone so many changes, at least seems to imply, even if it doesn't happen experientially, even if the universe is dead and it's not conscious of itself and there's no one watching, blah, 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 it does seem to have had change over time, over 14 billion years. It just started as a quark soup or whatever, and eventually turned into matter and planets and stars. So something happened, so there was actual material change. But if there's no one to experience it, does it all just happen at once, in the bulk, I suppose? Yeah.
I mean, I suppose that depends on whether you're defining time as being dependent on events that are happening within it,
sure,
or being completely interdependent. Because, if time is dependent on the events, then the changes the universe went through in the early stages would sort of lend some credit to the fact that there was time, because things were changing.
Well, do you know Carlo Rovelli, the physicist?
No, I've never heard of him.
I think you really dig him. I think, I can't remember what his area is specifically. It's either cosmology or quantum mechanics, I can't remember. But anyway, he writes popular science books, basically. And one of them I read last year, I can't remember what the name was. Apparently I totally suck at titles. But he was trying to hammer home that time is not a thing spread like a sheet invisibly across the universe that's just there independently. It's a fundamental principle of objects undergoing change. So it kind of carries with the object itself. And if there were no objects, if there was no material, it would be impossible to conceive of time, which is kind of an obvious point, I guess. But it never occurred to me that it's like a product of things actually change. It's all it is a measure of change, right? That's the only thing it can be, subjective or not. It's just a measure of change, with reference to nothing else. So, and I don't know, that blew my mind when he put it like that. Anyway,
but then again, I suppose if we're talking about with reference to change, the universe isn't capable per se of experiencing its own change.
Sure.
So is that again dependent on something being there to observe it?
Yeah, I guess this is like a really cosmic version of if a tree falls in the forest, right? Like it's it's the same as some distant galaxy where there aren't eyes or conscious minds or something. Is starlight still white, or is it just a really is it just a wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum? I don't know. I suppose what we're asking is does something need to be observed to actually be said to be happening objectively in the world? I guess But the fact that you can, leave a kettle boiling, walk out the kitchen, come back in, and it appears to have carried on being a kettle for as long as you've been away, it seems like evidence that the universe doesn't need, eyes to experience it, to be there. But
I suppose this is one of the benefits of panpsychism again.
Yeah.
Because
sure.
if everything's watching itself, if everything is then capable of generating its own time,
sure.
Then,
well, can I use this opportunity to inject the small Buddhist rant then? Because I think it's kind of
of course you can.
But the reason why I got quite taken with it a few years ago was getting bored with materialist narratives and stuff. There's one I should put a meme warning here. Like I saw this on lesswrong.com or something, where they would have mimetic warnings where an idea was so, they thought an idea was so deadly that you just need to be damn careful that you're in the right state of mind. And I always feel like someone should put a warning before what I'm about to say, because I was never able to recover from it. Maybe you won't think it's that deep, and that's a good thing. But in Buddhism at least, and I think in Hinduism to a degree, there's the doctrine of emptiness, essentially, in Buddhism anyway, which is that if you, I think I've done this before, but if you look on the inside of yourself, Hume said something similar about objects in the mind, but if you look inside of yourself, there isn't actually a central you anywhere. You can't look for one. You can't find one. There isn't a center to your consciousness that's actually having sensations. There's just sensations, awareness of those sensations, something for sure doing something feels pain, but it's not a centralized point. That scared the shit out of me when I first kind of came upon it, and I've never really been able to get over it since. So often, when I'm, in pain or doing something pleasurable, eating something nice or whatever, I'm often watching quite closely for where is this actually being experienced? Who is actually experiencing this? What's actually taking the sensation in? So it kind of flies in the face of all the, if there is a Western tradition anyway, of like there being, the homunculus or whatever on the inside that's watching everything and noting everything down on the inside of your brain. And Buddhists for sure, and especially I'd say, to be honest, like Taoists and lots of that crowd. Yeah, because that's not demeaning. I mean, lots of religions that aren't Judeo-Christian, based. I feel like that's just taken as read, that there isn't really a centralized self, which completely blew me away that anyone had this idea at all, and I've been unable to get it out of my head since.
Yeah, and I suppose that then plays into how, their meditation and being aware of things.
Sure.
Not being you, I suppose, but just being aware of what's happening as sort of a passive recipient.
Sure. Well, that's what freaked me out with when I first started meditating, was that it was exactly that one of the first exercises a Buddhist nun ever gave me was to actually try and find you on the, actually look for what is experiencing the sensations. And I couldn't find one then, and I still can't find one now.
Then I suppose my question would be, to you, I suppose, as well as the Buddhists, just in general, the Buddhists.
Yeah. So that'd be a great sitcom. That'd be ace.
Yeah. I get that. It is something. I think Hume stole it from the Buddhists, to be fair.
I don't know.
I think he went traveling.
Suspiciously close. It is suspiciously close, yeah.
He did go traveling in the East. And
right, that bastard.
I'm pretty sure he just stole it.
Must be.
Hume. As Aristotle did as well.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that's just the tradition in the West, is just stealing various ideas from the East.
Wait, as a segue, who was Aristotle nicking stuff from?
I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
But there were. I think it is a Buddhist idea that excellence comes from habit. And
they're certainly very steeped in it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, but my question would be, everyone can look into themselves and see that there's no self. Just sense experiences, sense data.
Sure.
Nothing really unifying it. But then you don't have any sort of qualms about saying that, like, it's not me that's having your sense data. It is you.
Yeah,
it's not multiple people. You know that it's you. You don't necessarily know what it is, but it is you.
Same as if I trod on your foot or something and you said, "Oi, that hurt." I would say, "Yeah, but who did it hurt? I mean, what's in that?" Yeah. Obviously, I just take it as read that I'm not going to do it again. Sorry, yeah, sure. I know functionally it doesn't really change anything. Yeah, true. Yeah, I know. That reminds me of I think Richard Feynman used to get really annoyed when he would have to go for dinner with philosophers, and I noticed in loads of his books he'd rant about how irritating they were. Particularly, he really hated philosophers of mind, and he said that he really doubted when highfalutin philosophers of mind were eating dinner. They were really, looking at this piece of steak on their fork and thinking, "Am I seeing the steak or am I seeing the light that's bouncing off the steak?" It's just not. You just think it's delicious and that's it, and shut up.
You're perceiving the steakness.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, pansteakism. Like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but, yeah. I only mentioned it as a segue because it never occurred to me before that there was a different way to think about consciousness. That it's very, once you get to that, not that point, but once that idea embeds itself in you, like it did in me anyway, I suddenly found this new dimension, I guess. I don't mean better or more enlightened or anything like that. Probably the other way, but I don't know, a new place to come from when it was debates about getting into debates about consciousness, because it's without the homunculus there at the middle, without the capital I watching in the middle, it is quite difficult to imagine what's going on in there. But again, it, like I said, sort of functionally, if you came at me with a blowtorch or something, I would get out of the way. I wouldn't think, well, it's not going to hurt anyone, so it'll be fine.
Yeah. Interestingly, I've been doing some research for a new video on new atheism, and that's actually really interesting. I don't know if you know much about Sam Harris.
Yeah, sure.
Neuroscientist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And his response to how we find meaning in a universe with no religion or no God was that we should try meditation and erase our sense of self.
Well,
that was his response.
Really? Okay. Yeah, so I read a few of his books. I was a fan of his for a few years. I didn't come across that specifically as advice. That's interesting. Okay, well, so he went on lots of meditation retreats, and I think he describes himself as kind of a secular Buddhist. So I can see where it's coming from. But so he thought we should just realize that's how essentially we'll become better people is by dissolving ourselves or whatever.
Yeah. And that struck me as quite odd for someone who is, a staunch scientist, materialist,
Yeah. Well, I think his position on he said it quite explicitly and not indelicately, but it was he certainly wasn't mincing words. That basically we should take the teachings of Buddhism, take away the metaphysical side, teachings of rebirth or whatever, and just actually practice a secular version of this. Which, I can kind of see where he's coming from with this.
I mean, has it brought you greater, sense of meaning, fulfillment, purpose?
No, not in any. No, none whatsoever. I'm more confused in terms of a purpose than I've ever been. It just gets weirder as the game goes on. But I would say, on a human level, there was one thing I got out of it, which is you can't do it. This will sound really kind of primitive, I guess, but you can't do it if you're super pissed off or super upset. But it definitely taught me, like meditating and sitting through a lot of Buddhist lectures anyway, when I was a bit younger. It certainly gave me some ability to watch your own emotions from the outside, so that if you're experiencing something unpleasant, you don't actually have to associate with it directly as though it's a part of you. I know that sounds very pseudo-spiritual, and it sounds quite pseudo-spiritual to me, but it never occurred to me before that you can actually distance yourself from your own, that you're not your emotions, essentially. You're not your own sensations, of the sensations inside your mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I don't know
and I suppose that plays it a lot into the Stoic attitude. You can't change what you experience; you can change how you react to it.
Yeah, well, I think that's still pretty applicable today. Like the Stoics still seem to live on, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's had a bit of a revival, Stoicism.
Yeah, well, it fits so comfortably with this kind of modern nihilism thing we've got going on now. I think like it's there isn't much of an answer to this except, well, we're all kind of screwed, so better just try and accept that it's going to be nasty or whatever. But
yeah.
Did you have any dabblings with? So I was a bit curious about the dualist leanings that you mentioned earlier. But did you ever have any dabblings with something a bit more immaterial? Did any of the doctrinal faiths or whatever draw you in? If it's not too invasive a question.
As in, you mean the Buddhist view?
Yeah, well, no, I mean anything, any of the sort of religious doctrines or any of the immaterial stuff spiritually. Like, did this ever appeal?
That's a good question. I'm definitely, just speaking from personal experience, more open to the spiritual and supernatural than modern science would suggest.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, through my GCSEs, I was a science student. My favorite subjects were physics, chemistry, biology.
Oh, a man after my own heart.
And all the humanities stuff could be left aside. And then by the time A levels came around, with the A levels I did biology for A level, but I did philosophy and philosophy and English.
Okay, yeah.
And I started through deeper kind of research into it, I suppose. I became more open to the idea of there being something else.
Sure.
And from that very scientific start that I had, I was very staunchly scientific. I've made myself more aware now of the limits of science and avoiding the dogma of scientism, particularly.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think scientism is something that you'll see a lot of nowadays, and I think personally it's equally as bad as religious fanaticism.
Sure, couldn't agree more, yeah.
So, I think we need to just to be humble is my opinion. We need to, we know a lot about the world through science. It's a massively powerful tool that we have and have cultivated over hundreds of years, and we're at a good place now. But there's still so much more to know, and the stuff that we don't know is massively outweighs the stuff that we know.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Definitely. So I think to remain humble, you don't necessarily have to agree that there are supernatural things that exist, but don't close your mind off to it.
Yeah, it's a really easy one to do. If you are, I only bumped into the word scientism a few years ago when a friend accused me of it, and it's almost like when you're given a new word, you can suddenly see it everywhere. And I saw it definitely in myself a lot, and I really had to draw back from this kind of obsessive reductionism. I don't know if you fell into this one as well, if that's what you're getting at, but I realized I've been like that for at least 25 years. Of everything had to be reducible down to natural laws, down to there must be some scientific component, otherwise it's rubbish. And I can't believe I spent a quarter of a century like that. It's so strange. But the problem is the fanaticism from the other side, which I've sometimes bumped into as well, where massive haters of scientism, and I completely get it. Maybe that's more where I am now. But the view is also just as ridiculous, and maybe it's fundamentalism that's the problem in any respect. Just like you were saying, to stay humble, actually accept that the gulf of between what we know and what we don't know is just so gigantic right now.
Yeah, and I mean, this goes back to our discussion of physicalism and non-physicalism. Whether qualia exist, whether the mind is ultimately physical or non-physical. Yeah. There is, there's meaning in the pursuit. Yeah. There's this song lyric that's been stuck in my head recently. There is no growing in knowing where you're going.
Cool.
And half of the magic and the purpose we get from it is finding things out.
Sure.
And if you're a priori closed off from any supernatural explanations, I don't want to say supernatural because that's got a stigma around it, but anything,
I know what you mean, yeah.
Anything just outside the realms of science.
Sure.
Then you're shutting yourself off from that striving for it, and that's half the magic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If it was possible to have a completely materialist framework for consciousness, do you think that would kind of would devalue humans in a way? Would devalue human consciousness?
That's a good question. I think it would. It wouldn't devalue consciousness per se, even if the answer was, the mind is completely physical or the mind is completely non-physical. There would be some element of kind of, oh, well, we've done it now.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Either way, even if it was non-physical, it's kind of like, next thing, bring it along.
Yeah.
But
well, on that note, then let me ask you something I think about quite a bit while I'm washing the dishes these days, which is why evolution. Why do you think if it was evolution that gave it to us, gave us consciousness, what the hell was the evolutionary benefit of creatures being conscious over creatures which aren't? Because like the Max Tegmark consciousness virus from planet to planet, whatever. It's a really cool metaphor. I'm stealing that. It's why couldn't you just have a whole planet of creatures that behave as cleverly as we do, but there's no light on the inside, essentially. Like, what you? Yeah,
I mean, that does seem easier.
Yeah, it does, right? Yeah.
Not to put myself knowing better than evolution. It does seem easier if there was like a planet of completely, animals, but they're just automatons. They're philosophical zombies. I think it's a mistake to think, not trying to be accusatory or anything,
no,
that there was necessarily a reason for it, because obviously evolution is a blind watchmaker. It doesn't it doesn't go towards anything per se. It didn't build up to us being conscious. It could just be that it happened randomly, and that was massively beneficial for us because now we're the top dog on the planet,
Definitely.
And it could have been something like that.
Yeah. That doesn't get brought up much, does it? That evolution. There's like junk DNA. There are not necessarily junk DNA, but there's loads of examples of just erroneous stuff that's been thrown into biology that doesn't actually serve any evolutionary benefit. It's just there as some weird accident or some throwback that was never taken out of the of the evolutionary design or whatever. Yeah, I always think of it as this teleological process trying to build the smartest thing, but it isn't like that, of course. Yeah, you're quite right.
No, I mean there was something I read. I think it was a Richard Dawkins book, I think it might have been the Blind Watchmaker actually,
Yeah.
where he said, there's conceivably it could have been completely different evolution, and we could have been rearranged in a completely different way, and we would have been so much better off. But it didn't. It happened this way, and this is where we are.
Sure.
And it could have just been that consciousness happened to come about. Maybe it's dependent on the mind. Maybe it's a direct result of the physical organizing of the brain, but it just happened the way it did, and we're where we are now.
Yeah, it just seems so, I guess, because it's the only thing I know, and it's the only thing we all know from the inside, it just seems so fundamental to being alive that it's hard not to imagine there's some kind of, that it confers some advantage against a version of me or you that's not conscious, that could still, make podcasts and play with the cat or whatever. But there are lots of versions of the theory floating around at the moment that it may have begun, the same way as like the eye began as a single photoreceptor that conferred an advantage over other, whatever. So you can see where this is going already, that maybe it began from some mode network. That's me trying to sound clever, like whatever it's called, something that sorts information, whatever. It may have started very simply trying to integrate senses, and then it just, consciousness got more and more complex and built up and maybe came out of this or something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that definitely plays into I don't know if you've read Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, sure. Amazing book.
So his big idea, obviously, in that was that we developed kind of consciousness, and most importantly, the ability to gossip. That's what separated humans out from everything else, is that we could talk about things that weren't directly in front of us. We could imagine scenarios and chat about things going on that weren't directly about, and that gave us an advantage, because then we could have group ideologies. Religions can come about, businesses can come about. We can use this funny paper that we can use to pay for things, and we'll get things in return. And so I like that, because it does give a proper description of how the society that we have now is kind of founded upon the ability to be conscious, to be
definitely. But I also like these explanations where you take something as noble as intelligence, and something we see as such the crowning achievement of our species, that we have so much more of it than any other animal. And I know that gossip is one theory. The other theory I've heard for just us having such radical intelligence compared to animals is essentially to get laid, that we use this for either humor, for impressing our sexual partners or whatever, but I really like these knockdown theories where some noble quality was actually for some completely stupid purpose. It was to gossip about each other, or to whatever, make each other laugh so we could take over other tribes or whatever else, and it wasn't actually to conquer the universe. It was just for some ridiculous purpose in our past or something, and that's how we ended up with this.
I can confirm, being a philosophy student, that intelligence doesn't necessarily guarantee you a shag.
Oh, you should probably put that on a t-shirt and make millions. I expect that's yeah, right.
But it's these things.
I don't remember those undergrads being being socialized generally. Yeah, I don't remember that at uni. But
but it could just be that it's for one of these random reasons. I suppose the other explanation is that it is our consciousness is a bit of the divine that we have within us. It's a spark of reason.
Sure. But that for sure. I bet millions of people would go along with that one. I mean, that's way more noble, isn't it? That kind of makes us almost part of God's mind, I suppose. Was it the logos?
Logos.
Okay. What's the root of that? Is that what is it? What is the logos when Christians say this? Is this the original word that God spoke, or what was the logos?
I think when we say logos, that's just Greek for reason.
Okay.
I mean, I suppose the Bible was in Greek, wasn't it? So it would have been logos. And then I suppose that gets traced back to the story of Adam and Eve and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Sure.
That we were, people always say our eyes were opened. We started seeing, we rose to intelligence, things, metaphors like that.
Sure. Yeah, and then we're horribly cursed afterwards. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. It's a lovely metaphor. Yeah. Yeah,
and then it's easy to see from there why we take such a human-centric view, because if we have that spark of the divine in us, we're made in God's image, then we are special.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's nice to think like that.
Exactly. I always suspected that was why animals were kind of forbade from ever becoming part of the kingdom of conscious things. It was always humans, because it would have made them slightly godlike as well, you know, like in the Bible anyway. It would have made them slightly holy or divine, and I always imagined that humans couldn't. We would have found this unconscionable, you know. Historically speaking, but yeah. I'm just looking over the notes we had. So this is totally off topic, but just while thinking about it with dreaming. This is just again a complete segue. Apologies if you're going to say something else.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Just
no.
as something someone said to me months ago that has stuck with me since. It never occurred to me, but just with dreaming with consciousness, I've only ever dreamt from the first person. Have you? Like, have you ever had a dream that was in the third person?
No, I think I've only ever dreamed as me.
What is that all about? Like, why? Because I'm sure, like me, you have plenty of daydreams where you're looking at something as a disembodied thing. You know, you're not from the first person. So why do we only dream in the first person? What's that all about?
I mean, I suppose it's got something to do with the first person is all we have experience of.
Sure.
Maybe there's something in the categories of the understanding that says we can only see things from a first person perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to imagine, like just right now, looking at yourself from the third person.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I mean, so for example, you could, you know, I can imagine my mum's face or the house I grew up in or something, and I'm just a disembodied eye in the sky. I can imagine it from the top or whatever, but whenever I dream, I'm always me. I'm always doing something inside my body, which is...
Oh, right, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but you're completely capable of... Everyone's capable, I think, of daydreaming in the third person. You can imagine just abstract objects, but I've never done that anyway, when I've been dreaming. You're always put in your body, in some weird life. Okay, maybe you have to go and build a go-kart with your ex-landlord or something, whatever it is, but I stole that from Mitch Hedberg. But, you know, it's... Yeah, I don't know. It's just always struck me as really strange that everyone seems to dream like that.
I mean, I think we can answer that quickly now, is that we have no idea what the hell dreaming is.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah.
You know, it's one of those things that we don't understand. I mean, Carl Jung talked a lot about dreaming as kind of, when we dream things, we dream up, you know, often things we've seen during the day, they'll be somewhat relevant. And it'll be sort of stories or imagined fictions and things that are representative of human archetypes. So these things that are absolutely foundational to what we are. And I was watching a Jordan Peterson lecture, actually. Jordan Peterson being a clinical psychologist. And he said that one of his clients, his patients, had the ability to lucid dream. It was a woman, because women have the ability to lucid dream more. Really? I'm not sure why that is. Yeah, apparently that's just a fact. And in her dream, she was fully aware, she was fully in control of everything she was doing, and she could ask the characters in her dream what they represented, and they would tell her.
Wow.
How mental is that?
That is Carl Jung's ultimate dream, I think. Like, he would love to do that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
so you're literally kind of questioning your subconscious, you know, directly. That is really weird.
Because it's one of those things, like, it would be, you know, off the back of Carl Jung and Freud, it would be impossible to say that we're not in some way affected by the subconscious.
Sure.
You know, our desires, we can't really desire what we desire.
Sure.
We can't choose how we react to things necessarily. Maybe it can be controlled, but only to a certain extent. And it could be that we're vastly more of us exist in the subconscious than it does in the conscious. You know, maybe it's just surface level what we experience.
Sure. That's a scary one, isn't it? Because you can't delineate. It's not like a watermark or anything. I can't say, oh, okay, this is me, and everything else, all this childhood stuff or whatever, that's just clearly marked out. It just bubbles up. I'll tell you what, as a vague example, yesterday, it was I think it was past midnight or something. I was sat at the computer doing whatever, and I was listening to something in the background, and in the whatever was playing, it was a talk or something, there was a knock on the door. And I guess for a second I thought it was my door, and it just scared the crap out of me because it came from nowhere, you know. And even though I briefly had the thought, no, this is something in what you're listening to. Chill out, it's fine. There's no one here, whatever. You know, my heart jumped to 1 million beats, you know, per minute, and I was just sweating. You know, you get this slight freaked out feeling, And I was just watching myself. There was the conscious mind that knows this is absolutely fine. And even if someone did knock at the door, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'll just go and say hello or something. It's fine. But it was just an entire mechanism I couldn't control. I thought that was so... Yeah, it just impedes on your life every now and then and takes control of the reins. It's so strange.
I mean, that sort of leans into... you've probably heard of it. I don't know much about it, but they call it System 1 and System 2 type thinking.
I vaguely remember.
Yeah, vaguely. And there are these things, I think it's... In one of them, I can't remember which, we just get used to patterns, because our brain's lazy. It likes to do stuff as efficiently as it can. So, you see something and you predict how the situation is going to go, and it does. And you don't need to kind of consciously focus on it, how it happens every time, because if you make a rough template of it, then you don't have to worry about it. But then, your example, you're listening, you're zoning out, it's nighttime, you're not expecting someone to knock at the door, then you hear that, and it kind of sends you into like, oh, what's happening? This isn't normal,
Sure.
And you're not really prepared for it.
Yeah, I guess the visceral, the bit that disturbed me a bit was that there was an entire mechanism going on in my brain that I had no conscious control over, and it had already taken full control, bodily wise of speeding your heart rate up and trying to get you ready to go and fight someone or whatever, and it's just these occasional reminders, daily reminders that you're not actually at the helm here. You're just you're in a way you're more a passenger, and it's so just like you said, like with choosing your own desires, for example, which you definitely don't do at all. You can choose whether to follow them or not, but you don't really seem to have any. What was the Schopenhauer quote about a man can choose what he can will? Oh man, but he put it so well. He can choose. Oh, damn it! You can choose what to do essentially, but you can't choose what you want to do. It was put in a far more poetic way. I forget, but yeah, indeed. Well, I wonder where you draw the line with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult being a thing yourself, and being under those subconscious influences. That it becomes difficult to draw the line, because you are you, and you can't step out of you and see what's what and sort it all out.
It's also very tempting to think of yourself as this coherent, I'm awake and I've got full control over my body and I've got complete sovereignty over everything that's going on here. Yeah. Apparently not.
Apparently not. No, it's just a tip of the iceberg, and there's the massively deep, dark sea beneath you.
Exactly.
And I think that one of the scariest things I've ever read was, or one of the scariest ideas I've come across was the fact that, anything that's humanly possible, it's within your power to do it. And that can be a massively freeing thing, because if you've got goals and ambitions, and you're free to follow them if they're humanly possible. If someone's done it, then you can. But the flip side of that coin, the Hitlers and Stalins of the world, everyone has the capacity for that as well.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying.
So there was do you know Radiolab, this podcast?
Yeah, I've heard of it, yeah.
Well, I can't recommend it enough. They're all great. And there was one particular episode about a guy. It's not an uncommon story. A guy who had some kind of gigantic, horrendous tumor somewhere. But anyway, he didn't know about this for about a year and was behaving in really dark ways that let's just not go into. Really deviant ways that he'd never behaved in that manner before. Turned out he had this gigantic tumor pressing on some particular part of the brain that deals with impulse control, yada yada. Had this thing removed, more or less went back to normal. And it's kind of the question of how culpable then was he for A, what he was doing, and B, any of us, like the entire legal system, the entire cause and effects, even socially, of blaming each other for things or praising each other for things, whatever, is on us all being conscious agents. And there was, I can't remember which behavioral scientist it was, I forget the name, but someone was trying to make out that in a few hundred years it will seem just as insane that we all thought we were free agents and putting each other in prison or whatever for having deviant brains as it seems for us, I don't know, as barbers being surgeons 100 years ago or whenever, 150 years ago or something, that this will seem completely primitive by their standards,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something that we can't predict. You can't even begin to imagine what discoveries we'll make in the future.
Sure.
What we'll discover about the brain and consciousness. But I think it's important that now we at least pretend like we do have responsibility, because you can go down a very
to go to a super dot is the ultimate nihilism, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimate nihilism. Nothing matters. Nothing has any purpose. I'll do whatever I want.
And that's the thing. Of course, I guess it comes down to, and then it isn't what you want. You're not even doing what you want to do because you couldn't have determined it. And then, God, where do you go from there? Like that must be...
That's worse than nihilism.
I know, right?
Oh, I didn't think we could get there.
Yeah, but man, I must say, this idea about the only way to the only way, the fastest way to actually run to find the result of the program is to run the program. This is like the ultimate freedom from that kind of deterministic thinking. I really like that. I'd never heard that before. That was awesome.
Yeah. That does seem like a bit of an antidote.
It does, yeah, definitely. I don't know why this isn't more popular. I think loads of people would benefit from hearing that, because as you know, it is quite easy to go to the deterministic place and just feel like you don't have any control over any of your life, essentially.
Yeah, it's very easy to go to the dark.
Yeah.
But I think, just a final note before we end this little podcast.
Sure.
Why is consciousness a good thing? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's certainly the most remarkable thing in the universe that we found, I would say. But I would say that because I am conscious. So, but it's, at least in my view anyway, there are two, if we all got to a Star Trek future where we're all wearing white and what's it called? Fully automated luxury communism has taken over and everything is, everything's perfect and we're all just sitting by pineapple trees having a great time or whatever. And we had to find a goal for humanity to work together for something. I would say the two fundamental questions would be A, what is the origin of matter? How did matter come around? Why? How the hell does this work? And the second one will be, what the hell is consciousness? Those are the two, to me anyway, the two fundamental mysteries of being, of all of it, cosmologically everything. So I would say it's quite a privilege to live on the inside of the greatest mystery that there ever was. But yeah, how about you?
I mean, it definitely says something that throughout centuries, millennia of philosophy and science, consciousness is still one of the things that we can, validly discuss and have disagreements about. There is no consensus over what consciousness is, how it works, why it's there.
We're not actually really any closer, are we?
No.
I mean, we've got a lot more words for it, and we've certainly looked a lot deeper into it than the ancients, but we're still not really any closer to a mechanistic explanation of it.
No, but just to relate back to the final point that you said, it's wonderful that we get to be on the inside of it. Even if we never figure it out, we got to experience it, and this is one of the things why I can't stand people saying, oh, the universe won't care if humanity gets wiped out. We could be wiped out by a meteor. The sun could expand into a red giant and engulf the earth. The universe won't bat an eyelid. But the universe doesn't have the capacity to care.
Sure.
We do, and that makes us sort of really special.
Well, and in terms of if we had a cosmic destiny, I mean, it's unlikely that there aren't aliens. But as far as we're aware, we are the only conscious creatures in the night at the moment. We haven't found any evidence for anything else otherwise. So we kind of have a moral imperative to not snuff out the candle, like not to go south with this one. This might be the only ever instance of conscious creatures anywhere,
Yeah. And I think I agree with the thesis of Max Tegmark's book. We should seek to wake up as much of the universe as we can.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. That's an awesome note to leave it on. I like that. Yeah. That's ace, yeah.
Well, I think we solved it, definitely.
Yeah, cracked. Yeah,
completely. Just before you go, may I ask you a question about your book? How's your new book coming along?
Oh, cheers, man. Thanks. No one asks this in my real life. In fact, no. Thank you. It's not far from being finished, and I won't pretend that some of the things we've talked about today won't be in there. And I think I'm just going to plagiarize quite a lot of what you came up with and try and subtly hide it in there. That'd be ace.
Yeah, definitely take it.
Cheers. But no, about a month, and it should all be done. But it's mostly what I'm spending all my time with. Do you write yourself? Do you write fiction or anything like this?
I used to write fiction, and poetry. I used to write a lot of poetry.
Yeah.
I've turned my attention more towards YouTube recently.
Yeah, I was just going to say I saw your I think your most recent video, the narrative about. I'm sorry, this was last time we uploaded. Was this about dogs?
Yeah, the man and the dog. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is very they're very nicely done. I thought it's lovely.
No. Thank you very much.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me, man. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Cheers, man. Yeah, same to you. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed.
Thank you. I hope our listeners at home have something to think about anyway. Well, quite a lot to think about. This has been going on for nearly 2 hours.
Oh, damn, really?
Yeah.
I'm really impressed we did this sober, or at least I know I did, and we went to some strange places somehow still.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Yeah. All the best. Cheers.